The decision to build a purpose-built stadium comes back to the vision of having the right infrastructure. To be able to attract world-class talent, you've got to have a facility that also matches that. So we'll make sure that we consult with fans, we consult with players. It's important that we get that feedback from experiences. We know it's a different audience to the men's game.
Empowering the future of sports industry leadership for everyone committed to fair representation in sport. You're now listening to the Sports Pro New Era podcast.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the New Era podcast. I'm Katie Preston, and I'm joined today again by Eleanor Kayufa. How are you, Eleanor?
Hi, Katie. I'm really well, thank you. I can't lie, to be honest. I am counting down the days until the Women's Euros kick off. It's really exciting. I've seen a lot of momentum and buzz on social events and so on, just people talking all about it. It's definitely got me thinking about what actually makes these tournaments so special. You know, the match day, the experience. It's one of a kind. I think a lot goes into actually making these tournaments.
Absolutely. There's this sense that it's not just a tournament this year, it's a proper moment. You've got brands properly jumping on board. We're talking big names like Visa, Heineken, Nike, who've committed to multi-year deals, not just one-off campaigns. I also read recently that UEFA doubled its sponsorship revenue for the women's game between the last tournament and this one, which is also kind of massive. And then you've got broadcasters actually putting money and time behind it now too, giving it primetime slots, pundit teams, promo campaigns, that sort of thing. I think BBC and ITV in the UK are both covering every single game this summer, which says a lot. And then even outside of the UK, there's been this big push for visibility with UEFA launching a centralised broadcast model so that every country gets high quality coverage. There's this report that I saw last year that said women's football viewership globally grew by over 140% in the last 3 years. So the audience is clearly there, and it's nice to see that something's being done about it.
Wow, yeah, definitely that's a lot. And I think, as you said, that's the thing. We're really serious about growing the women's game, like as an industry. We've got to stop just like copying and pasting the women's football model. There's been a lot of discussion around that, but it is often the place where people go back to just because it is an industry that is booming. But it's now is a chance to build something better, something that works for women's sport, not just for what's been inherited. And that's been a big conversation across women's sport lately. How do we stop borrowing the men's model and start building something of our own? We've seen clubs and leagues in the US like really push forward with this, whether it's clubs like the Las Vegas Aces and the WNBA opening the first ever purpose-built training facility for a women's team, or New York Liberty transforming, their Barclays Center into something uniquely theirs, or even here in the UK with Brighton Hove Albion planning to build their, very first purpose-built stadium for their women's team. No other English football club has done that, which is an amazing step forward.
100%. It's really encouraging to see, and personally it does make me feel more connected and more engaged and more excited about the sport. It's also flipping the script on how we value women's sport and who it's really for. Which brings us very nicely into today's guest, Zoe Johnson, who's Managing Director of Women's and Girls Football at Brighton. She's got loads of experience in the game, and now she's leading one of the most ambitious projects in the WSL. We talk about everything from talent pathways and leadership and culture to Brighton's top four vision and what it's really taking to build something sustainable, not just in terms of facilities, but in people, in purpose and in values. So we'll jump straight into it.
This is the Sports Pro New Era podcast. We can dive right in. And, obviously you've had an incredible journey across the football industry. So if you can take us back to the start, where this all started for you and how you ended up as a managing director of women's and girls football at Brighton.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Football's been sort of always ingrained in me ever since I was a small child. I grew up with a brother who was football mad and a mum and dad who were both football mad. So I think it was always going to be in me that I'd be involved in football in some capacity, whether that was playing, coaching, or in the role that I'm in now. I never envisaged these sorts of roles would be available in women's football, I think, when I started my career. So obviously it's fantastic that they are. And sort of through my journey, I played football when I was a young child, and then sort of grew into wanting to be a coach. So I did a lot of coaching in my younger days in Centre of Excellences and various different guises and different clubs. And then I always had a career aside from playing. I was a birding surveyor, and I always did sort of coaching them even at a weekend, because that's just where the women's game was. And then eventually sort of progressed to where there was roles that was in off field, that was sort of overseeing programs, was driving women's programs forwards. And that's sort of what brought me into Brighton now. I've probably worked in football for probably 20 years. So yeah, and that's what's brought me to be the managing director at Brighton.
Amazing. And obviously, all that experience, I'm sure, has shaped, who you are today and kind of your leadership style and everything. Have you had any defining roles or moments which have shaped your leadership today?
Yeah, I think that's something that I think it's probably being shaped every day, and I think, like you said, there's probably been significant moments where you look back and there's learnings that you take, there's good things that happen in your career, there's challenging moments that happen in your career, and I think there's probably not like one standout moment where I think that was what sort of defined my career or changed it. Because I think I'm still in that development stage every day. I think you're learning and always trying yourself with other leaders that you can learn from and sort of try and progress from. And I think that's where I am. I think there's not been really one defining moment. And I'm sure there'll still be many more to come in the future.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, with this current role is obviously an important role. And I know Brighton has been quite open and transparent about their ambitions as well. How would you say having all those early experience have prepared you to take on this role? You said you didn't expect that maybe these things would be available, but what made you, take it and absolutely go for it?
Yeah, I think the what attracted me to the role here at Brighton, I think, is it's an ambitious football club. It's a club that's going in the right direction. It heavily invests in the women's team. It invests in the girls' academy. It's a club that, for me, from the outside, Brighton was always a long way away from home for me. So it would have took a lot for me to move from one side of the country to the other. But I think hearing the vision and the investment that the club was looking to make, it was an opportunity that I probably couldn't turn down, and it was a really exciting opportunity for me to come and lead a project here at Brighton. And we've obviously got a real clear sort of public vision of where we want to be. And I think to be able to try and lead a group of amazing staff and players to be able to achieve that was just an opportunity for me that I couldn't turn down.
I think it's really interesting that you say about the move to Brighton, because obviously we can all hear the northern twang in your voice, Zoe. So the thing that you've mentioned before is that you haven't really felt like you've faced barriers that many women in sport often describe and have faced themselves. Why do you think that is, and what sort of experiences you have that sort of go against that narrative?
I've probably been quite fortunate in my career of maybe the clubs that I've worked at or the people that I've worked with. I've never really faced any sort of challenges, some of the barriers that you hear other people have faced in their industries and in their clubs. I think a lot of it is building relationships from the offset when you go into the clubs and building relationships with the right people so that they sort of buy in and they invest into the women's programme as well. And I think coming into Brighton, that was always really easy because from the top, people know that the club and the owner and the board really invest in women's football. So I think naturally it means that there's no barriers around. And I think it's important that when you're taking a job opportunity, and it's probably something that I've learned along my career, is that you choose your owners very wisely. And I think I've got that in who I work with here at Brighton. So it means that the barriers are limited because everyone knows from the top down, they invest and they back women's football. And I think that's probably been similar to other roles and other clubs that I've been at, is that the women's team is ingrained. And I think to be able to prevent the barriers, you need to have a strong board behind you that are really invested in women's sport and females working in football, whether that's working in the men's or the boys' game. I think it's just important that you have that backing and that buy-in from a hierarchy. And I think that's something that I've always had where I've been. So granted, I probably have been quite fortunate in that space, but I do think it's about building those strong relationships with the right people when you walk through the door of an organisation.
For sure. And I think you've kind of mentioned it already by just saying it's sort of really important, the investment and the passion that the sort of the rest of the team have. But have you seen any major differences when working on the men's side? I know you worked at Liverpool a few years ago. Sort of working on the men's side and the women's side, are there any major differences, or is it sort of your experience not as different as others may seem?
Yeah, I always say there's obviously the small differences naturally when you're working with 25 female players or you're working with 25 male players. There's going to be little small nuances that are maybe slightly different because the athletes are slightly different and their needs are slightly different. But as a whole, I always say here at Brighton, our programme runs the same way as what the men's programme runs. In terms of the day-to-day operation, there's no differences. The processes are the same. We have the same sort of senior leadership team across the club that are running both the men's team and the women's team. Everything's really aligned. And I think the only difference is probably the size of salaries for the players, the size of the revenues are completely different. But I think the rest of it is just people. Other than the small nuances with the female team to a male team, I think the actual business side of things and the processes that you implement, this is exactly the same. And I think the women's game has significantly grown to an even higher level. And I think with that now the case, it is just the size of the operation and the size of the programme is just the same as the men's game. How we facilitate and put on a match day. It's a match day event for the women's team. It's a match day event for the men's team. And it's all the same. I think, like I said, the biggest difference for me is just the money value that's involved in that.
Yeah, I think that's always the main thing. Everyone, we just had our Sports for Live event as well, and everyone's talking about investment. That's the main thing,
Yeah.
that's needed. But hearing what you just said there, I think there's so much focus, at least from your end, in terms of those personal and people relationships. And it is definitely so important in making the right decisions and leading your team and having that buy-in, as you just mentioned. But I'd be curious, you've navigated different roles and clubs and dynamics. Have there been any like conscious decisions you've made when stepping into meetings or navigating different environments or roles or people that have supported you in coming into this decision and being like a true leader, taking ownership and knowing that whole thing that Brighton has been clear and transparent about? Obviously, it's something that resonates with you and you're driving forward. How do you go into those meetings ready to drive and, have that change?
From my perspective, I think it's probably just something that's, I feel, probably just been in me with my sort of my character and my personality. And I think most people will say they plan the weeks and you have a diary and you know exactly what the week ahead is going to entail. I think when you work in football, it's got to be ingrained in you to understand that you don't know, you're just reacting to different situations, and you've got to be able to sort of go into those different meetings and those different challenges every day, and you've got to be able to embrace that, and you've got to be able to react and be on your toes at all times, because you definitely don't know every day when you come into an environment. You don't know what you're going to encounter, and we're in a business that's very reactive, and you're reacting to certain different scenarios every day. And I think for me, there's no real significant thing that I would say that I do when I walk into a room, when I'm in a meeting or anything like that. I would always say I try to have a staffing team that I give full autonomy to. I try to go into sort of situations where I might be the managing director of the women's and girls department here at Brighton, but I would like to think that I've built a senior leadership team here that work with me, and we lead the program together. So I think it's never really about me walking into a room and being a leader and being, oh, look at me and what decisions that I make, because that's not how I am as a person. I think that's, yeah, I think it's just how I react and how I respond is, I think it's probably just sort of one of those things that's ingrained in you, and whether I always get it right or not is probably another matter, but I always try and do my best.
Talking more about you and your senior leadership's sort of vision for Brighton, can you talk us through what that looks like for the women's and girls programs at the club, and what success actually looks like for you as a team, both on and off the pitch?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a real clear vision that's been quite public for a few seasons now, and that's to be a consistent top four WSL team, and that's aligned with the same on the men's side, who want to be consistently a top 10 Premier League team. That's something that we knew wasn't going to happen overnight. That's something that we knew was going to be years in the making, to be able to go and compete with some of the clubs that have got far more history than what we have in the Women's Super League. But that's something that we really believe in. We're really ambitious, and the strategy to sort of getting there has been the infrastructure and building a world-class training facilities for the athletes and the players to be able to perform in every day, and for the staff to be able to work to their best ability. So we're a data-driven club, so we use data to help support our decisions when that comes to sort of recruiting the players and some of the staff. I think that's hiring people to be able to then lead the project. And I think I just alluded to there around implementing that senior leadership team to be able to drive us every day. And then the next part of it is recruiting a playing squad that's able to compete on the world stage, to be able to compete in Champions League, which is in the future where we want to be as a football club. So I think alongside that, that's probably the women's first team. And then we have a girls' academy, which we invest really highly into. We want to be a world-leading girls' academy. It's probably a space that a lot of clubs have been working hard on to be able to keep producing their own talent, and it's an area that we're really passionate about, and we want to make sure that in years to come, we've got players that have come through our whole pathway that are playing and starting games for Brighton Hove Albion women's team. So to be able to do that, you've got to go through the same process. We've got to have the infrastructure. We've got to hire the right people, the best people. We've got to have an ambitious board and owner to be able to continue to back that. And that's really our vision of where we are. And we know we're still in the early days of that journey. And this season, if we do end up finishing fifth, that'd be our highest place finish for the women's team in the history. So I think that's that next level, what we've got to try and finish above the rest of the teams in the WSL under that top four is really critical for us this season. And that's been a real big driver for us. And hopefully come the final day of the season and this weekend, we can still be starting fifth. And that's sort of the next part of our vision. And then and what can we do next season to even better that? And we know it's hard and we know it's challenging, because I think there's so many big clubs in the WSL that have the same ambitions and the same vision as what we might have. So it's always thinking about, can we be ahead of the curve? What can we do that's going to be sort of better than the rest? And can we make sure that we're ready and we're prepared for that at all times?
I think we've all got our fingers crossed for a top four finish for you, Zoe. But even fifth isn't too far off. It's not too bad.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. I always say to our CEO, it's a tough task, is that top four vision, because there's only 12 teams in the league, and there's a lot of top football clubs in the league that have got obviously fantastic histories behind them, and the talent pool of players isn't that big, so we're all competing for the same thing. So yeah, I do always tell him it's a very hard vision, but equally we all believe in it. We're really ambitious, and if we keep working towards what we're trying to do, then I'm sure and confident in the future that we will reach that.
Sorry to interrupt your podcast. We just wanted to draw your attention to what's next in the world of sports marketing. There's no doubt it has evolved, but now it's time to understand how. That's why we're introducing Impact X, a bold new initiative from Sports Pro and Sport Quick. We'll be showcasing groundbreaking work and some of the most impactful campaigns from the last 5 years. Join us as we break down why sports sponsorship works and how to execute it well in an all-new exhibition of sports marketing excellence. Impact X, where creativity meets performance. Search Sports Pro Impact X to find out more. You're now listening to the Sports Pro New Era podcast.
You mentioned something a minute ago, which we'll go on to shortly, around the stadium sort of infrastructure. So we'll go on to that in a second. But just while we're on the sort of the grassroots side of things, how do you identify and nurture that young female talent, especially in such a competitive talent environment?
Yeah, and I think for us the hardest challenge is that our geographical area, and that half of our geographical spread to be able to recruit and identify young talent early is the seaside, because we're based on the coast. So naturally we probably have bigger challenges than what everybody else does in terms of identifying the talent, but it's a space that we've invested heavily in. We've really invested early into our girls' academy to make sure that we've got the right processes and the right infrastructure to be able to identify that talent. So first and foremost, it's making sure we've got a staffing team that knowledgeable in their area, know the geographical area really well, and be able to have the staff that can go out and identify the talent. And we work really closely with with Brighton Hove Albion Foundation. We do a lot of events here at the training ground. They run a lot of development centres. We run our own development centres in various different locations to be able to make sure that from as young as 8 years old, that we're identifying that talent early to be able to then bring them through our pathway into our girls' academy. So I think the main success of doing that is investing really early into different development centres, really strong working relationships with local grassroots teams, local schools, our own foundation programme, to be able to make sure that we're giving girls the opportunity to be able to play football and to participate, but then also those that are good enough to be able to then come through into the academy setting, giving them the opportunity that they can see a real pathway of where they can come right through our pathway, do their education with us, and then hopefully end up progressing through to our women's first team. So I think the biggest key to identifying that talent is building relationships and having the right staffing support to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think the main thing there is always like obviously giving the opportunities and having that safety net for them. And I think one of the most exciting things that you mentioned before is the developments around the new stadium, which is a purpose-built women's team stadium, which will actually be the first club in England to have a purpose-built stadium for their team, which is huge. It's really exciting. Like I can't wait to see what that will be like. Yeah, I've heard various things about. From what I've heard, it's going to be like a modular setup, which will be expanding depending on, kind of the audience size and the crowd and so on as the club grows, which I think is phenomenal. It would be great if you can share a bit more of, first of all, why it was like the time to do something like that, and maybe some details around what makes it so special.
Yeah, so I think really the decision to build a purpose-built stadium, I think, comes back to the vision of having the right infrastructure to be able to not only grow our team on the pitch and give them the right environment for them to be able to perform to the best of their ability, but also being able to build our fan base. We play at Crawley at the moment, which is a great stadium for us. It's obviously got a capacity of just over 5,000, which we can get to and fill quite regularly, but it's not based in Brighton. And I think the real sort of key thing for the direction from the football club is that we want to have a women's bespoke stadium in the city that we can build our own fan base, we can get really good attendances, we can drive revenues, but also so that we can actually go through a process of building our own stadium that is designated and built purposely for female athletes. We're now at that next level, and with athletes that we want to be able to make sure that the facilities for them are world leading so that they can then perform to the best ability. And I think to be able to attract world class talent, you've got to have a facility that also matches that. So that's really the decision behind wanting the purpose-built stadium. And look, we know we're very lucky and we're very fortunate to have an owner and a board that are willing to sort of fund that and back that just for the women's team. And it's a really exciting time for us. How the stadium's going to look and where the stadium's going to be and whether it's going to be a modular or a fully built one, those conversations are still very much in the early stages. We're really excited by it, and I think it's important if we want to achieve our vision of being a top four team. I think it's really important that we have the infrastructure and the facilities to be able to support the players and the staff to be able to get there.
Yeah, no, that sounds really exciting. And I think, it's something everyone I think is looking forward to. There have been discussions around how clubs and teams can make their stadiums, like the existing ones, more suitable to their athletes, like female athletes, but also to the female fan base. There's a lot of research around how a female fan is different to a male. I don't know if you can give us a bit of insight in terms of like those conversations that you mentioned. What are the things you're looking that will be different? Like apart from just having a stadium for the women's team, is there anything else that's a key priority?
Yeah, and there'll be lots of work that will go into that. We'll make sure that we consult with fans, we consult with players, we consult with various different stakeholders. I think it's important that we get that feedback from experiences that women's fans, we know it's a different audience to the men's game, and it's probably getting their experiences of what they've encountered at various different stadiums around the country. So I think we speak a lot around what's right for the players and making sure when they come into the changing rooms at half time, there's enough cubicles for them all to be able to go and use that at half time. That there's the shower cubicles are all different and all set, but you're right in terms of that audience as well. And it's making sure that we in the concourses we cater for that audience as well. And we know, like, we look into the research around that in terms of what actually the best products and what is actually do the fans want in there. It might not be the traditional pints of beer that gets sold at men's games. So I think, again, it's still very much in its early days for us. There is a lot of research going on in the background because we want to make sure when we do build a stadium, we get it right and we do cater to everybody. But at this moment, it's probably still a little bit too early to share too much detail because the workings are still going on.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, this obviously fits into kind of what you're trying to build at Brighton. What kind of leadership culture are you on a personal front trying to build for Brighton, but also for the women coming through? Like you mentioned how important it is for you to have the right team and the right decision makers and having that buy-in. How are you influencing kind of that stream of people coming into the club?
I think it's a challenging space because the talent pool in the women's game isn't huge and there's not been sort of senior leaders within women's football, and I haven't been around for sort of 20, 30 years like they have in the men's game. So I think it's, from my perspective, it's going through real clear, rigorous processes with the club to make sure that when we hire a new head coach, we know that it's a head coach that's going to, what we would deem to be one of the best coaches in the world. And then we believe we've done that with Dario, who's a top coach out on the grass, and the players have really had the privilege of being able to see that firsthand out on the grass with him, and hopefully that's what's also aided us to our 5th place finish. But I think in terms of else, like my job obviously is to make sure that a sort of leader, that the high performance culture has got to be led by me in my role. And I think it's giving, in terms of how it's always giving my staff ownership, giving them autonomy to be able to lead and run with their areas. Is never going to micromanage anyone. That's not sort of how I am. And I think making sure that I sort of live and breathe that every day is really important. And yeah, that's probably what we've done so far with our leadership team.
Amazing. And as we slowly wrap up, I think something I always ask people, because I find it really interesting, is if you were to go back and give your younger self one piece of advice at your start of your career, what would that be?
I think it would be to surround myself with people that I trust. I think that's really important to be able to be successful in your career, is being able to trust people that are around you.
Thanks, Zoe. Thanks for joining us, for sharing your insights and experiences today. It's been lovely.
Empowering the future of sports industry leadership for everyone committed to fair representation in sport. This is the Sports Pro New Era podcast.